I paid for my seat. I know my rights. The words exploded across Flight 728's cabin, slicing through the pre-takeoff murmur. Preston Lloyd, a man with salt and pepper hair and a crisp polo shirt, stood halfway out of his aisle seat, pointing at Marlon Tate, the sharply dressed black man who just settled into 14B beside him. "Sir, please lower your voice," Flight Attendant Celeste Ortiz said, her professional smile tightening at the corners. "I want another seat. Now." Preston's voice dropped to a controlled hiss. "I specifically requested not to be seated here." 30 minutes later, that same cabin would fill with screams as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. "There's a device in the lavatory," someone would shout. The plane would bank sharply left, diverting toward St. Louis Lambert International Airport, passengers clutching armrests as Captain Arthur Kelly's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is an emergency landing. Prepare for descent." But what the passengers of Flight 728 didn't know, what would leave millions of livestream viewers gasping later that day, was that the bomb wasn't real. And Preston Lloyd wasn't just an angry passenger with prejudice burning in his veins. He was something far more calculated. "Men like you should know their place," Preston had whispered to Marlon before the chaos began. Marlon Tate, founder and CEO of Pangraph Technologies, had simply nodded, reached for his wallet and pulled out not a driver's license, but a platinum-embossed credential bearing the airline's emblem. "Sir, I know exactly where my place is," he'd replied. "As a Class A shareholder of Northwest Dominion Air with oversight authority, I believe my place is right here in 14B. The look on Preston's face in that moment would become the thumbnail for a video that would reach 2.4 million views by nightfall. Have you ever witnessed someone's mask slip? That moment when what they've been hiding suddenly becomes visible to everyone? If you have, drop a comment below with the word "exposed" and tell me where you're watching from. Because this story isn't just about a flight diverted or a racist passenger caught on camera. It's about an elaborate plot that targeted a black-owned business, a conspiracy that stretched from Tampa to Seattle, and how one man's refusal to move from his assigned seat uncovered a network of hate hiding behind badges, corporations, and American flags. Let me ask you something. What would you do if you discovered someone had been secretly working to destroy everything you'd built? Would you retreat into safety or would you stand and fight? The choice Marlon Tate made that day changed the trajectory of his company forever. "I need all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened," Celeste announced as the confrontation escalated. Phones emerged from pockets, recording the tension. College senior Leah Novak, seated 5 rows back, tapped the livestream button on her social media app. "Something wild is happening," she whispered to her growing audience. None of them knew about the memory card that would soon be slipped into Leah's seat back pocket by a passenger whose name nobody caught. None of them realized that the random seating arrangement that placed Preston beside Marlon had been meticulously planned months in advance. And absolutely none of them suspected that the bomb scare about to throw their flight into chaos was connected to 6 months of corporate sabotage that had cost Pangraph Technologies millions in government contracts. "Tampa County Deputy Reserve," Preston declared, flashing a badge from a leather folio when Captain Kelly arrived at row 14. "You might want to think twice before you make any decisions." The captain extended his hand. "Mind if I verify that credential, Mr. Lloyd?" Preston's mouth twitched as he surrendered the badge. Kelly inspected it, brow furrowing. "Odd. Reserve credentials are issued annually. This one expired last year." "Must be a printing error," Preston snapped, snatching it back. If you've ever felt that moment when pieces of a puzzle suddenly click together, you know exactly what Marlon experienced. Tampa County, the very jurisdiction where Pangraph had lost a major contract after someone anonymously leaked doctored financial documents. This wasn't coincidence. This was connection. Are you starting to see it too? The threads connecting what seemed like isolated incidents? If you're following along, hit that like button right now. We're just getting started. 30 minutes after pushback, Flight 728 finally rolled down the runway. At cruising altitude, Celeste resumed beverage service, but tension hung thick in the recycled air. Marlon typed notes on his tablet, cross-referencing Tampa County procurement records he'd cached offline. A pattern emerged. Every bid Pangraph had lost traced back to a political action committee called Heritage Umbra. And the treasurer listed on their filings? Preston Lloyd. Before Marlon could process this revelation, a passenger from row 17 lunged toward the aisle, clutching his duffel bag. "There's a device, front lavatory, help." His voice trembled, eyes wide with terror. Celeste dashed forward while First Officer Ingrid Chin secured the cockpit. The front lavatory door was ajar. Inside, taped to the mirror, blinked the unmistakable LED of a timer. Captain Kelly declared an emergency. Oxygen masks dropped. Screams ricocheted through the cabin. The plane banked left, diverting toward St. Louis. In the chaos, Preston's composure shattered. He unbuckled, elbowed past Marlon, and barked into a cell phone he'd secretly reactivated. "It's blown up," LSU girl posted. "Shut it down." Marlon caught enough fragments to sense a cover-up. He seized Preston's wrist, yanking the phone away. The screen displayed an encrypted messaging app under the alias, Umber Prime. If you've made it this far into the story, you're about to discover how deep this conspiracy goes. Type, "I'm here," in the comments if you're ready for what comes next. Because when federal marshals met Flight 728 on the tarmac in St. Louis, they weren't just responding to a bomb threat. They were about to uncover a campaign of economic warfare against minority-owned businesses that would shake the foundations of corporate America. And it all started because one man refused to move from his assigned seat. Marlon Tate hadn't always flown business class. Growing up on Chicago's South Side, he'd watched planes streak across the sky from his apartment window, wondering what it felt like to sit inside one. His grandmother told stories about riding segregated rail cars from Alabama to Chicago because flying was a luxury reserved for others. "One day," she promised, "our people won't just ride, they'll build the planes." She didn't live to see Marlon graduate from MIT with dual degrees in computer science and logistics management. She didn't witness him coding until 4 a.m. in a dorm basement, fueled by vending machine coffee and determination. And she never met the angel investors who initially loved Pangraphi's predictive maintenance algorithms, until they saw the founder's face during the final pitch meeting. "We're looking for something more established," they'd said, avoiding eye contact. Marlon had nodded, thanked them for their time, and walked out. 2 weeks later, he secured funding from a black venture capitalist who recognized not just the brilliance of the technology but the hunger in Marlon's eyes. 5 years after that, Pangraphi's software was saving Fortune 500 companies hundreds of millions in supply chain optimization. When Northwest Dominion Air offered him an equity stake and permanent executive pass in gratitude for his company's contributions, Marlon had accepted with quiet pride. Now at 43 he maintained the same habits that had built his success, arriving early for flights, cataloging details others missed, and carrying a novel he'd been meaning to finish. Today it was Baldwin's "Go Tell It on the Mountain," dog-eared at page 87. "Coffee, sir?" Celeste asked, her service cart paused at row 14. "Black, please," Marlon replied, setting his book aside. Preston Lloyd snorted. "Figures," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Celeste's hand trembled slightly as she poured. At 32, she'd worked for Northwest Dominion for 7 years, rising from regional routes to international flights. The daughter of Mexican immigrants, she developed a sixth sense for troubled passengers. The ones whose complaints would escalate, whose demands would multiply. Preston Lloyd had triggered every internal alarm from the moment he'd boarded. "And for you, sir?" she asked Preston, voice neutral. "Scotch. Neat. Make it a double." He checked his watch. 9:17 a.m. "We don't serve alcohol until—" "I know the policy," Preston cut her off. "Water then. Bottled, not tap." As Celeste moved down the aisle, Preston returned to his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be financial charts. His manicured nails tapped impatiently against the screen. At 58, Preston projected the confidence of old money, though his wealth was relatively new, built through government contracts and real estate developments in Florida's Gulf Coast region. His company, Sovereign Solutions, specialized in municipal security systems and had expanded rapidly during the post-9/11 boom. What his corporate website didn't mention was his role as treasurer for Heritage Umbra, a political action committee whose mission statement emphasized preserving traditional American values in commerce and culture. The PAC's donor list included several CEOs who'd lost contracts to minority-owned firms in recent years. If you're wondering why someone would create an entire organization just to undermine businesses owned by people of color, you're asking the right question. Hit that subscribe button now because we're about to dive into the psychology behind systemic economic sabotage. 5 rows behind Marlon and Preston, Leah Novak adjusted her phone's angle to capture the ongoing tension. A senior at Louisiana State University studying journalism, Leah had started live streaming campus events last year. What began as a hobby had evolved into a platform with 50,000 followers who tuned in for her unfiltered commentary on social issues. "Update everyone," she whispered to her viewers. "The guy in 14A is still giving Major Karen vibes and the flight attendants look stressed. Something's definitely happening." Comments flooded her screen. Is this about to be another racist airplane freakout? Where are you flying to? Can you get closer? Leah angled her camera slightly, careful not to be too obvious. I can't move seats right now, but I'll keep you posted. Oh wait, the captain is coming back. Captain Arthur Kelly moved deliberately down the aisle, his silver-framed glasses catching the cabin lights. At 55, he'd logged over 22,000 flight hours and handled everything from medical emergencies to mechanical failures. But in recent years, passenger conflicts had become increasingly common and increasingly volatile. Gentlemen, he addressed row 14, is there an issue I can help resolve? Marlin rose slightly. Captain, I'm exercising my prerogative as a Class A shareholder to request compliance with your non-discrimination charter. Either this passenger agrees to civil conduct, or you'll need to consider removal. Preston scoffed. Removal? I know my rights. I'm a paying customer. Kelly's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced through protocols. Diverting or returning to the gate meant delays, penalties, a potential public relations nightmare, but leaving hostility unchecked at 37,000 feet posed a safety risk. In row 17, a passenger in a navy hoodie observed the confrontation with unusual intensity. Nobody had caught his name during boarding. He kept his head down, baseball cap pulled low. Now he watched Leah's livestream activity with particular interest, occasionally touching the outer pocket of his duffel bag. Have you ever noticed how certain people seem to fade into the background until the exact moment they need to be seen? Pay attention to this passenger, he's more important than anyone realizes. First Officer Ingrid Chin joined Captain Kelly in the aisle. At 38, Chin had flown medevac helicopters in Afghanistan before joining commercial aviation. Her experience in crisis situations had taught her to recognize the warning signs of escalation. Captain, she said quietly, we should consider Security Protocol 4. Protocol 4, the discreet alert to ground staff that a passenger might need to be removed upon landing. It would put air marshals on notice without alarming the cabin. Kelly nodded almost imperceptibly. Mr. Lloyd, Mr. Tate, I need this situation resolved before we reach cruising altitude. Can I count on both of you to maintain professional behavior for the duration of this flight? Absolutely, Captain, Marlin replied. Preston's jaw tightened. Fine, he muttered. As the flight crew returned to their positions, an uneasy peace settled over row 14. Marlin reopened his book. Preston stared straight ahead, occasionally glancing at his watch. But beneath this superficial calm, both men were calculating their next moves. For Marlin, the coincidence was too perfect to ignore. The Tampa County connection, the Heritage Umbra link, it aligned with patterns he'd noticed in Pangrapha's lost contracts. 6 months ago, his company had been poised to revolutionize municipal logistics systems across Florida. Then came the anonymous leak, doctored financial documents suggesting Pangraph engaged in anti-American data sharing with foreign entities. The allegations were disproven within weeks, but the damage was done. Government contracts worth millions had evaporated overnight. Now, seated beside the treasurer of the very pack that had celebrated Pangrapha's setbacks in their newsletter, Marlin felt pieces clicking into place. This wasn't random airline seating, this was reconnaissance. Preston was gathering intelligence on his next target. For Preston, the plan was unraveling. He'd requested seat 14A specifically to observe Marlin, to gather personal details that might be useful in Heritage Umbra's ongoing campaign against Pangraph. The confrontation wasn't supposed to happen, certainly not in such a public forum with phones recording. His instructions had been clear. Observe only, report back, maintain cover. Now his face would be all over social media by landing. The operative in first class, the one who was supposed to accidentally discover compromising information in Marlin's briefcase during a bathroom break, would have to abort. Months of planning, thousands in donations, all potentially wasted because of one seating dispute. If you've ever wondered how prejudice transforms from personal bias into organized action, you're watching it unfold in real time. Comment below if you've ever witnessed discrimination that seemed too coordinated to be coincidental. As Flight 728 reached cruising altitude, Celeste resumed beverage service. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of a cross-country flight. Laptops opening, headphones going on, conversations fading to murmurs. But beneath this routine, currents of tension continued to flow. Leah's livestream had grown to 15,000 viewers. News outlets had begun reaching out, requesting permission to use her footage. In row 17, the hooded passenger slipped a memory card into his palm, waiting for the right moment to move. And in the cockpit, Captain Kelly and First Officer Chen exchanged concerned glances as a message came through from dispatch. An anonymous tip had been called in about Flight 728. Something about a security threat in the forward lavatory. Probably nothing, Kelly said. But let's alert the air marshal discreetly. Chen nodded, reaching for the secure communication channel. Neither of them could have predicted how the next 30 minutes would transform not just their flight, but the national conversation about race, power, and the invisible systems designed to maintain both. Because sometimes the most dangerous threats aren't the ones that tick and blink. Sometimes they wear badges, carry briefcases, and sit in aisle seats, drumming their fingers impatiently against the armrest. And sometimes the only way to expose them is to refuse to move from your assigned seat. If you're still with me, you're about to witness how a routine flight became the battleground for something much bigger than one man's prejudice. Like this video right now if you're ready for what happens next. Excuse me. Preston's voice cut through the ambient hum of the cabin. 30 minutes had passed since takeoff, and the brief peace was fracturing. You're taking up the armrest. Marlon glanced down. His elbow occupied perhaps an inch of the shared space between them. With deliberate slowness, he shifted slightly, returning to his book without comment. And your shoulder keeps brushing against mine, Preston continued, voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby rows. I need my personal space. Marlon closed his book, marking his place with a finger. Sir, these seats are designed for average-sized adults. I'm sitting normally within the confines of 14B. If you require additional space, perhaps first class would have been a better choice. Are you suggesting I can't afford first class? Preston's face flushed. I chose this seat specifically. The words hung in the air, an accidental confession. Marlon's eyes narrowed slightly. Specifically? For what purpose? Preston backpedaled. For the legroom. Obviously. From her position near the galley, Celeste observed the exchange with growing concern. She caught the eye of Terrence Washington, the air marshal seated inconspicuously in 9D. A subtle nod passed between them, acknowledgement that the situation in row 14 required monitoring. I'm going to use the restroom, Marlon announced, standing to let Preston move into the aisle. Preston didn't budge. Can't you use the one in the back? The forward lavatory is closer, Marlon replied evenly. Some of us paid extra for convenient access to that lavatory, Preston said, making no effort to move his legs. 3 rows ahead, an elderly white woman turned in her seat. Young man, just let him pass. You're being ridiculous. Preston's head snapped toward her. Mind your own business, lady. Don't speak to her that way, said the man beside her, removing his headphones. What's wrong with you? The confrontation was expanding, drawing more passengers into its orbit. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, recording the escalation. Leah's livestream viewer count jumped to 27,000. Have you ever noticed how quickly bystanders choose sides when conflict erupts in public? Drop a comment with "witness" if you've ever stood up for someone facing harassment. Celeste moved swiftly down the aisle. Sir, please allow Mr. Tate to pass. Preston finally shifted his legs, but as Marlon stepped past he muttered, Your kind always wants special treatment. The cabin fell silent. The comment, loud enough for nearby rows to hear, crossed a line that even casual observers recognized. Marlon paused, turned, and looked directly at Preston for the first time. My kind? He repeated, voice controlled but carrying. Would you care to elaborate on what you mean by that, Mr. Lloyd? Preston's eyes darted around the cabin, suddenly aware of the phones pointed in his direction. I meant CEOs, he said. Always thinking they deserve special privileges. Interesting, Marlon replied. I don't recall mentioning my occupation. The trap was sprung. Preston had revealed not just his prejudice but his prior knowledge of Marlon's identity. More pieces of the puzzle locked into place. In row 17, the hooded passenger shifted forward slightly, watching the exchange with unusual intensity. His hand moved to the outer pocket of his duffel bag, then withdrew. This is getting out of hand, Celeste said. Mr. Lloyd, I need to speak with you privately. As Preston reluctantly followed her toward the galley, whispers rippled through the cabin. Passengers exchanged theories and observations. Some searched Marlon's name on their phones, discovering articles about Pangraph Technologies and its founder's rise from Chicago's South Side to the upper echelons of the tech industry. He's worth like $300 million, someone whispered. And that guy wouldn't let him go to the bathroom? Definitely racist. Maybe it's not about race. Maybe they have history. The speculation grew as Marlon entered the forward lavatory. Inside, he leaned against the sink, taking a moment to collect himself. The confrontation was escalating beyond a simple seating dispute, and he needed to think strategically. If Preston was connected to the Tampa County contract loss, if Heritage Umbra was actively targeting Pangraph, then this flight wasn't just an uncomfortable travel experience. It was an intelligence opportunity. Marlin removed his phone from airplane mode, a violation of federal regulations he'd never committed before, and sent a secure message to his chief security officer. Run deep background on Preston Lloyd, Tampa County. Connection to Heritage Umbra confirmed. Possible active operation in progress. Will update when landed. He returned his phone to airplane mode, washed his hands and exited to find Terrence Washington waiting outside. Everything all right, sir? The air marshal asked quietly. Just a disagreement about personal space, Marlin replied. Nothing to be concerned about. Washington nodded, but his posture communicated vigilance. We received an anonymous security tip before takeoff. Probably nothing, but I'd appreciate if you'd report anything unusual. Anonymous tip? Marlin's mind raced. About what specifically? Can't say, Washington replied. Just keeping my eyes open. As Marlin returned to his seat, he noticed Preston engaged in intense conversation with Celeste near the galley. The flight attendant's expression was professional but firm. Preston's body language suggested frustration. Hands gesturing emphatically, jaw tight. In row 17, the hooded passenger used this distraction to make his move. He stood, duffel in hand, and walked casually toward the forward lavatory. As he passed Leah's row, he stumbled slightly, his hand brushing against her seatback pocket. The memory card slipped inside, unnoticed by anyone, except Marlin, whose peripheral vision caught the subtle movement. If you think this is just about one racist passenger, you're missing the bigger picture. This is about systems and networks designed to maintain power. Like this video right now if you're starting to see the connections. Preston returned to 14A, his expression thunderous. Your flight attendant friend threatened to have me removed from the flight, he said to Marlin. She's not my friend, Marlin replied. I've never met her before today. Right? Preston scoffed. Just like you happen to have shareholder credentials for this specific airline. Just like you happen to be seated next to me. The accusation was revealing. Preston believed he was the target of a setup, not the architect of one. The paranoia of the guilty, projecting their own tactics onto others. Mr. Lloyd, Marlin said quietly, I think we both know this seating arrangement wasn't coincidental. The question is, who chose it and why? Preston's eyes widened slightly before his expression hardened. I don't know what you're talking about. Tampa County, Marlin said. Heritage Umbra. The leaked documents that cost my company millions. Ring any bells? For a fraction of a second, Preston's mask slipped. Fear flashed across his features before being replaced by practiced indignation. Are you accusing me of something? Because that sounds like defamation. Not accusing, Marlin replied. Just connecting dots. The tension between them had transformed. What began as a racist passenger refusing to sit beside a black man had evolved into something more complex. A confrontation between hunter and prey, except the roles were suddenly unclear. In the cockpit, Captain Kelly received another message from dispatch. The anonymous security tip had been followed by a second call, providing specific details about a potential threat in the forward lavatory. Protocol required investigation. Chin, take the controls, Kelly said, rising from his seat. I need to speak with Washington. As the captain made his way into the cabin, the hooded passenger from row 17 returned to his seat, duffel noticeably lighter. His eyes met Marlin's briefly, a glance that communicated something indecipherable but significant. Have you ever had that feeling where you know something important just happened, but you can't quite identify what it was? That gut instinct that says, pay attention? Marlin felt it now, watching the hooded passenger settle back into 17F. Captain Kelly conferred quietly with Terrence Washington near the forward galley. Their expressions were neutral, practiced at not alarming passengers, but their body language betrayed concern. Washington nodded and began a casual walk toward the forward lavatory, eyes scanning the cabin as he moved. Ladies and gentlemen, Celeste's voice came over the intercom, we're expecting some light turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts when the sign illuminates. The announcement was standard, but its timing was not. No turbulence had been forecast on their flight path. This was procedure, a way to ensure passengers were secured before addressing a potential security threat. Leah, still live streaming, picked up on the subtle shift in atmosphere. Something's happening, she whispered to her viewers, now numbering over 50,000. The crew is acting weird, and that guy who wouldn't let the black passenger pass is having some kind of meltdown. Preston had indeed begun to show signs of stress, checking his watch repeatedly, attempting to access his phone despite the airplane mode requirement, glancing nervously toward the cockpit. "Expecting a call?" Marlon asked. Preston ignored him, instead signaling to Celeste. "How much longer until we land?" "We're approximately 3 hours from Seattle, sir," she replied. "That can't be right," Preston said, voice rising. "We should be making better time." "The headwinds are stronger than forecast," Celeste explained. "Is there something I can help you with?" Preston shook his head, sinking back into his seat. His right leg bounced rapidly, a tell of anxiety that Marlon noted with interest. In the forward lavatory, Terrence Washington conducted a thorough but discreet inspection. Finding nothing unusual, he reported back to Captain Kelly. The anonymous tip appeared to be a false alarm, or perhaps a distraction. If you've made it this far into the story, you're about to witness how quickly things can escalate when desperation takes hold. Comment, "I'm ready," if you want to see what happens next. The seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft ding. Passengers complied, conversations quieting as they prepared for turbulence. In row 17, the hooded passenger remained perfectly still, eyes fixed on the back of Preston's head. Marlon used the moment of quiet to continue his analysis. If Preston was connected to Heritage Umbra, and Heritage Umbra had orchestrated the Tampa County contract sabotage, then this flight confrontation might be part of a larger strategy. But what was the objective? Simple harassment seemed too petty for the resources involved. Unless Marlon's gaze shifted to his briefcase secured under the seat in front of him. Inside were preliminary designs for Pangrapha's newest algorithm, a system that could revolutionize emergency response logistics for government agencies. The Seattle presentation was supposed to be its public debut. "Mr. Lloyd," Marlon said quietly, "did you request seat 14A before or after I booked this flight?" Preston's head snapped toward him. "What?" "It's a simple question. Did you book your seat before or after I booked mine?" "How would I know when you booked?" Preston replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "Exactly," Marlon said. "You wouldn't, unless you had access to the passenger manifest, which would require either airline employee credentials or," he paused, "law enforcement authorization." Preston's Tampa County Deputy Reserve badge suddenly took on new significance. Even expired, it might have provided enough authority to request passenger information, especially if someone inside the airline was sympathetic to Heritage Umbra's cause. The pieces were aligning into a disturbing picture: targeted surveillance, coordinated harassment, and potentially corporate espionage. But before Marlon could pursue this line of thinking further, a commotion erupted from row 17. The hooded passenger lunged into the aisle, clutching his duffel bag. "There's a device, front lavatory, help." His voice trembled, eyes wide with terror. Celeste rushed forward while First Officer Chin, who had emerged from the cockpit moments earlier, moved to secure the flight deck. The forward lavatory door was ajar. Inside, taped to the mirror, blinked the unmistakable LED of a timer. "Captain?" Chin called out. "We have a situation." The cabin erupted into chaos. Passengers craned their necks, questions flying. Terrence Washington moved swiftly toward the lavatory, hand inside his jacket where his weapon was secured. And through it all, Marlon watched Preston's reaction. The man wasn't surprised. He wasn't afraid. For a brief moment, before he composed his features into an appropriate mask of shock, Preston Lloyd looked satisfied. This wasn't a random act of terror. This was the next phase of an operation, one that had just shifted from surveillance to active disruption. If you think the story is intense now, just wait until you see what happens when federal agents meet this flight on the ground. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. Everyone remain calm and in your seats. Captain Kelly's voice boomed through the cabin, cutting through the rising panic. "This is a security situation that we are handling according to protocol." But calm was in short supply. A mother clutched her child to her chest, whispering reassurances. An elderly man fumbled with his oxygen tank. College students who moments ago had been watching movies now pressed their faces to windows, as if escape might be found in the endless blue beyond the glass. Terrence Washington emerged from the lavatory, expression grim. He conferred briefly with Captain Kelly, their voices too low for passengers to hear. Kelly nodded once, then returned to the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, as a precautionary measure, we are diverting to St. Louis Lambert International Airport. Please follow all crew instructions. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 22 minutes. The announcement sent fresh waves of anxiety through the cabin. Phones appeared despite regulations, passengers desperate to contact loved ones. Leah's livestream viewer count exploded past 100,000 as news networks picked up the feed. "We're being diverted because of some kind of device in the bathroom," she whispered to her audience. "Everyone's freaking out. The crew is trying to keep us calm, but all electronic devices must be powered down immediately," Celeste announced, her training taking over despite her own fear. "This is not a request. It is a federal requirement during this emergency." Most passengers complied, but Leah kept streaming, her phone partially concealed by her tray table. In row 14 the dynamic had shifted dramatically. Preston's earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by visible agitation. He repeatedly checked his watch, then glanced toward the hooded passenger in row 17, who now sat with his head bowed, hands clasped as if in prayer. "Interesting timing," Marlon said quietly. Preston's head snapped toward him. "What?" "The device. Appearing right when our conversation was getting uncomfortable for you. Are you suggesting I had something to do with this?" Preston hissed, voice low enough that only Marlon could hear. "That's absurd. I'm as much at risk as anyone else on this plane." "Are you?" Marlon held Preston's gaze. "Because you don't look scared, Mr. Lloyd. You look inconvenienced." Preston's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I think I do," Marlon replied. "Tampa County Deputy Reserve. Heritage Umbra. The anonymous tip about a security threat that just happened to materialize. It's all connected, isn't it?" For a moment, Preston seemed to consider denial. Then his expression hardened into something colder, more calculated. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into, Tate. This is bigger than you and your little tech company." "Try me," Marlon challenged. Preston leaned closer, voice dropping to a whisper. "America is changing too fast. People like you acquiring too much influence, too much control over critical infrastructure. Heritage Umbra exists to restore balance." "Balance?" Marlon repeated. "Is that what you call economic sabotage?" "We call it preservation," Preston replied. "When companies like yours secure government contracts, you gain access to sensitive systems. Systems that should be managed by people who understand American values." The naked prejudice was startling in its confidence. This wasn't the defensive posturing of someone caught in an act of discrimination. This was the calm assertion of someone who believed deeply in the righteousness of their cause. If you've ever wondered what drives people to organize against others based solely on race, you're hearing it now. This isn't just about one man's bias, it's about structured, funded efforts to maintain power. Hit that subscribe button if you want to understand how these networks operate. As the plane began its descent toward St. Louis, oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, standard procedure during an emergency landing. The cabin filled with the sound of plastic hitting plastic and the hiss of oxygen flowing through tubes. In the confusion, Preston seized the opportunity to reach for his phone. He disabled airplane mode and began typing rapidly, fingers flying across the screen. Marlon caught glimpses of an encrypted messaging app and the username, Umbra Prime, before Preston angled the device away. "That's a federal violation," Marlon noted. "So report me," Preston snapped, continuing to type. Terrence Washington appeared beside their row, expression stern. "Sir, all devices must be powered down immediately." Preston reluctantly complied, but not before sending his message. The damage was done. Whatever warning or instruction he'd been trying to communicate had been delivered. The plane banked sharply, beginning its final approach to Lambert International. Through the windows, passengers could see emergency vehicles assembling on the tarmac. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cruisers with lights flashing. The reality of their situation hit home. This wasn't a drill or a false alarm. This was a genuine threat response. "When we land," Preston said suddenly, "you should know that I have connections in St. Louis law enforcement. This won't end well for you if you continue with these accusations." "Is that a threat?" Marlon asked. "A reality check," Preston replied. "Heritage Umbra has chapters in 38 states. Members include judges, police chiefs, corporate executives. We look out for each other." The implication was clear. The network Preston represented wasn't just a fringe group of racists. It was an organized system with tentacles reaching into positions of power and authority across the country. In row 17, the hooded passenger remained unnaturally still, head bowed. Marlon studied him with growing suspicion. The man's behavior didn't match the profile of someone who had just discovered a potential bomb. There was no nervous checking of the lavatory, no anxious communication with flight attendants. He simply sat, waiting, like an actor who had delivered his lines and was now watching the scene unfold. Have you noticed how some people seem too calm in crisis situations? That's often because they know something you don't. Comment, suspicious, if you've picked up on the hooded passenger's unusual behavior. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan. Captain Kelly's voice came over the intercom one final time. Brace for landing. Head down, stay down. Passengers assumed the position, foreheads pressed against the seats in front of them, arms crossed over knees. The plane touched down hard, reverse thrusters roaring as Kelly executed an emergency stop. The force threw everyone forward against their seatbelts, then back against their seats. The moment the aircraft came to a complete stop, emergency slides deployed from exit doors. Flight attendants began evacuation procedures, their voices carrying the practiced calm of those trained for disaster. Leave everything. Move quickly. Jump and slide. In the controlled chaos that followed, Marlon made a critical decision. As passengers rushed toward exits, he reached under Preston's seat and grabbed the man's leather folio, the one containing the Tampa County Deputy Reserve badge. Preston, already halfway to the exit, didn't notice the theft until it was too late. "Hey!" he shouted, turning back. "That's my property." But the flow of evacuating passengers pushed him forward, out onto the emergency slide. Marlon tucked the folio into his jacket and followed the evacuation route, sliding down onto the tarmac where emergency personnel directed passengers to gathering points away from the aircraft. On the ground, federal agents moved with practiced efficiency, separating passengers for questioning. Bomb squad technicians approached the plane in heavy protective gear, prepared to neutralize the device in the lavatory. Leah, somehow still live-streaming despite the evacuation, captured the scene for her now millions of viewers. "We're on the ground in St. Louis," she narrated breathlessly. "They're treating this as a real bomb threat. Everyone's being questioned. Wait, something's happening with the guy from row 14. Her camera panned to show Preston engaged in heated conversation with an FBI agent. He gestured repeatedly toward Marlon, who stood calmly nearby, the stolen folio concealed inside his jacket. "Sir, I need to see some identification," a female agent said, approaching Marlon. "Of course," he replied, producing his driver's license and Pangraph credentials. "I'm Marlon Tate, CEO of Pangraph Technologies. And I believe I have information relevant to your investigation." The agent, her badge identified her as Special Agent Priya McKenna, raised an eyebrow. "What kind of information?" "Evidence that this incident may be connected to a pattern of corporate sabotage and organized harassment," Marlon replied. "And possibly—" He lowered his voice, "a false flag operation." McKenna's expression remained neutral, but her posture shifted slightly, the subtle tell of someone whose interest has been piqued. "Come with me, Mr. Tate." As they walked toward a mobile command center set up near the terminal, Marlon glanced back at Preston, who was watching them with undisguised fury. The man who had refused to sit beside him, who had whispered that men like you should know their place, was now realizing that the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. Inside the command center, McKenna offered Marlon a seat at a small table. "Start from the beginning," she said. "And don't leave anything out." Marlon placed Preston's folio on the table. "This belongs to a man named Preston Lloyd. Inside you'll find a Tampa County Deputy Reserve badge that Captain Kelly already noted is expired. Lloyd is also the treasurer of a political action committee called Heritage Umbra, which I believe has been orchestrating attacks against minority-owned businesses, including mine." McKenna opened the folio, examining the badge. "Go on." 6 months ago, Pangraph was poised to secure several government contracts in Florida. Then anonymous sources leaked doctored financial documents suggesting my company engaged in improper data sharing. The allegations were disproven, but we lost the contracts anyway. Every bid we lost traced back to jurisdictions where Heritage Umbra has significant influence. "And you believe Lloyd is connected to both the leaks and today's incident?" McKenna asked. "I know he is," Marlon replied. "He admitted as much to me on the plane. What I don't know is whether the device in the lavatory is real or a staged disruption designed to further some agenda." As if in answer to his question, McKenna's radio crackled. "Command, this is explosive ordnance disposal. Device appears to be non-functional. Repeat, non-functional. Professional construction but no actual explosive material. This is a sophisticated fake." McKenna's eyes met Marlon's. "A hoax," she said. "Or a distraction," Marlon suggested. "The real question is, distraction from what?" Outside, bomb squad technicians emerged from the plane, helmets removed, signaling the all-clear. Passengers watched from behind security cordons, relief mixing with confusion. If there was no bomb, why had someone planted a fake device? The answer came from an unexpected source. Leah Novak approached Agent McKenna, phone in hand. "Excuse me," she said. "I think you need to see this." She held out her phone, showing a notification. Someone had slipped a memory card into her seat back pocket during the flight. When she checked its contents after landing, she'd found video files, night vision footage of Preston Lloyd in what appeared to be a garage, assembling the mock device while discussing disrupting corporate parasites and keeping America pure. If you're shocked by what you're hearing, imagine how Marlon felt discovering that the man seated beside him wasn't just a random racist passenger. He was part of an organized plot targeting minority business leaders. Type, exposed, in the comments if you're ready to learn how deep this conspiracy goes. McKenna's expression hardened as she watched the footage. "We need to take Mr. Lloyd into custody immediately," she said, reaching for her radio. "And I want to know who recorded this video." But as agents moved to apprehend Preston, a new complication emerged. The hooded passenger from row 17, the one who had first alerted the cabin to the device, was nowhere to be found. In the chaos of evacuation and questioning, he had somehow slipped away, leaving behind only questions about his role in the day's events. Was he Preston's accomplice? A whistleblower from within Heritage Umbra? Or something else entirely, a third player in a game whose rules and objectives remained obscure? The answers would come, but not before another shocking revelation. The flight manifest showed an unassigned seat in first class, purchased by a shell corporation linked to the same network that funded Heritage Umbra. A seat that had remained conspicuously empty throughout the flight. The plot, it seemed, was even more complex than anyone had initially suspected. 3 hours after the emergency landing, passengers of Flight 728 gathered in a secure area of Lambert International Airport. FBI agents moved methodically through the crowd, conducting interviews, collecting statements, building a comprehensive picture of the day's events. Marlon sat apart from the others, a cup of cooling coffee on the table before him. Agent McKenna had granted him a measure of privacy after their initial debriefing, recognizing that the CEO was not just a witness but potentially a target. On his tablet, Marlon reviewed Pangrapha's security logs, searching for patterns that might connect to Heritage Umbra's activities. The company's cybersecurity team had detected multiple intrusion attempts over the past year, sophisticated probes that had previously been attributed to routine corporate espionage. Now, in light of Preston's revelations, those incidents took on new significance. "Mr. Tate?" Celeste approached his table, still in her Northwest Dominion uniform despite the hours that had passed. "I wanted to check if you needed anything." "I'm fine, thank you," Marlon replied. "How are you holding up?" Celeste's professional composure wavered slightly. "It's been intense. I've never experienced anything like this in 7 years of flying." "Few people have," Marlon acknowledged. "Please sit if you'd like." She hesitated, then took the chair across from him. "I keep thinking about the signs I missed. Mr. Lloyd's behavior seemed like typical first-class entitlement at first. I should have recognized it was something more calculated." "We all miss signs," Marlon said. "That's how effective these operations are. They hide in plain sight, disguised as everyday prejudice or routine conflicts." "Operations," Celeste repeated. "It's hard to believe this was all planned. That someone would go to such lengths just to," she paused, searching for words, "to keep people like me in our place?" Marlon suggested. Celeste nodded, eyes downcast. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," Marlon said. "The people who should be sorry are being questioned in separate rooms right now." Across the terminal, Preston Lloyd sat handcuffed to a table, surrounded by federal agents. His earlier bravado had crumbled under the weight of evidence. The video on the memory card, the fake bomb components traced to purchases made on his credit card, the encrypted communications recovered from his phone. "We know about Tampa County," Agent McKenna said, placing photographs on the table. "We know about the doctored financial documents. We know about Heritage Umbra's campaign against minority-owned businesses. What we don't know is who else is involved." Preston's attorney, summoned from St. Louis at considerable expense, leaned forward. "My client exercises his right to remain silent." "That's his prerogative," McKenna acknowledged. "But the charges are serious. Terroristic hoaxing. Hate crime conspiracy. Wire fraud. The memory card alone provides enough evidence for a federal grand jury." Preston's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw, the tell of someone calculating odds, weighing options. And then there's the matter of the unassigned first-class seat, McKenna continued. Purchased by Sovereign Holdings LLC, which our financial crimes unit has already connected to Heritage Umbra's donor network. Care to explain why your organization bought an empty seat? The attorney placed a hand on Preston's arm, a warning not to speak. But Preston had begun to recognize the depth of his predicament. The operation had failed spectacularly, leaving him exposed while others remained safely in shadow. I want a deal, he said suddenly. Preston, don't, his attorney began. Shut up, Preston snapped. I'm not taking the fall alone. He turned to McKenna. I want immunity in exchange for names. People much higher up the food chain than me. McKenna's expression revealed nothing. We'll need to discuss terms with the U.S. attorney. But first, I need to understand the full scope of today's operation. What was the purpose of the fake bomb? Preston hesitated, then seemed to deflate. Disruption and discreditation, he said. The device was never meant to be discovered until after landing. The plan was for our operative in first class to find it during final approach, alerting the crew just in time to prevent disaster. Making him a hero, McKenna concluded. Exactly, Preston nodded. The narrative would be that while corporate elites like Tate were oblivious to security threats, traditional patriots were protecting American skies. Heritage Umbra's social media network was ready to amplify the story, connecting it to broader arguments about who should control critical infrastructure. And the confrontation with Mr. Tate? Was that planned as well? Preston's expression soured. No. That was improvisation. I was supposed to observe only, gather intelligence on his Seattle presentation. The seating dispute complicated things. Because it drew attention, McKenna said. Got you on camera. Made you memorable. Yes, Preston admitted. When the LSU girls started live streaming, everything changed. Our first-class operative aborted, leaving me exposed. That's when we shifted to Plan B, the immediate bomb scare to force an emergency landing before Tate could piece together too much. McKenna leaned forward. And who was the hooded passenger? The one who discovered the device. For the first time, Preston looked genuinely confused. That wasn't our operative. Our guy was supposed to be in first class, seat 3A. He never boarded. Then who raised the alarm about the device? Preston shook his head. I don't know. When I saw someone rushing toward the lavatory, I assumed it was a random passenger who had somehow discovered the device early. It wasn't until we were on the ground that I realized something was wrong. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already Byzantine plot. If the hooded passenger wasn't Preston's accomplice, who was he? And how did he know about the device? Have you ever realized that what you thought was the whole story was just the tip of the iceberg? That's what the investigators were feeling now. Like this video if you're ready to dive deeper into this conspiracy. Meanwhile, in another interview room, Leah Novak was explaining how she discovered the memory card. I didn't even notice it until we were on the ground, she told the agent questioning her. I was gathering my things and there it was tucked into the seat back pocket. I thought maybe another passenger had left it behind. And you decided to check its contents? The agent asked. I'm a journalism major, Leah explained. Curiosity is kind of my default setting. When I saw the video files, I knew I had to bring them to authorities immediately. Did you notice anyone approaching your seat during the flight? Anyone who might have placed the card there? Leah thought for a moment. There was a guy in a hoodie who passed by a few times. Row 17, I think. He stumbled once near my seat. I didn't think anything of it at the time. The agent made a note. The same passenger who later alerted the cabin to the device. Yes, Leah confirmed. Is that important? It might be, the agent replied. We're trying to establish a timeline of events. Across the terminal, Captain Kelly and First Officer Chen provided their own accounts to FAA investigators. The anonymous security tip. The decision to alert the air marshal. The emergency protocols followed during the diversion. In 22 years of flying commercial, I've never encountered a situation quite like this, Kelly admitted. It wasn't just the security threat. It was the deliberate nature of it all. The feeling that we were pieces being moved on someone else's board. Chen nodded in agreement. The timing was too perfect. The tip comes in, then suddenly there's a device exactly where the tip suggested. Except the tip came before the device was planted, which means the entire sequence was choreographed, Kelly finished. Right down to our responses. The implications were disturbing. Not just a hate crime or a corporate sabotage attempt, but a sophisticated psychological operation designed to manipulate public perception and institutional response. As evening fell over St. Louis, the various threads of investigation began to converge. The FBI's cyber division had traced the encrypted communications from Preston's phone, identifying several Heritage Umbra associates in positions of authority across multiple states. The Financial Crimes Unit had mapped a network of shell companies used to funnel donations into the PAC's accounts. And forensic analysis of the fake bomb had yielded DNA evidence linking it to a garage in Tampa, the same garage shown in the memory card footage. But the identity of the hooded passenger remained elusive. Security cameras had captured him entering the airport in Atlanta, boarding the flight, and participating in the emergency evacuation. Then, in the confusion that followed, he had simply walked away, not running, not hiding, just calmly exiting the secure area as if he belonged somewhere else. If you're wondering who this mystery passenger is and what role he plays in our story, you're asking exactly the right question. Comment, Mystery Man, if you have theories about his true identity. At 7:30 p.m., Agent McKenna gathered the key witnesses, Marlon, Celeste, Leah, Captain Kelly, and First Officer Chin, in a private conference room. The time had come to share what the investigation had uncovered. First, I want to thank all of you for your cooperation, McKenna began. What happened today was not a random incident or an isolated act of prejudice. It was part of an organized campaign targeting minority-owned businesses in strategic sectors. She activated a digital display, showing a network diagram of Heritage Umbra's connections. Preston Lloyd is the treasurer of a political action committee that serves as the public face of a much larger operation. Their goal is to prevent companies led by people of color from securing government contracts, particularly in areas related to infrastructure, data management, and security systems. Why those sectors specifically? Marlon asked. Control, McKenna replied. These are the systems that power modern governance, logistics, communications, surveillance. The people behind Heritage Umbra believe these functions should remain in traditional hands. Traditional meaning white, Celeste said flatly. Precisely, McKenna nodded. But they're smart enough not to say that explicitly. Instead, they talk about American values and cultural compatibility. They use proxies and cutouts to maintain plausible deniability. Like the Tampa County leak, Marlon said. Exactly. They doctor documents, plant rumors, create just enough doubt to sway procurement decisions. When that fails, they escalate to more direct methods. Like fake bombs on planes, Captain Kelly added grimly. Yes, McKenna confirmed. Today's operation was designed to disrupt your Seattle presentation, Mr. Tate, while simultaneously advancing a narrative about security risks posed by diversity initiatives in critical industries. But it failed, Leah pointed out. The live stream exposed what was really happening. It failed because of unexpected variables, McKenna agreed. Your live stream. Mr. Tate's shareholder status. And most significantly, the actions of the hooded passenger from row 17. She switched the display to show security footage of the man in question. This individual was not part of Heritage Umbra's operation. Based on Preston's testimony and our own analysis, we believe he may be connected to a counterintelligence effort targeting the organization. Counterintelligence. Chin repeated. Like, government? Possibly, McKenna said. Or corporate security. Or even a rival faction within Heritage Umbra itself. What we know for certain is that he deliberately exposed their operation by discovering the device early and planting evidence that would implicate Preston. The memory card, Leah realized. Correct. The night vision footage was recorded by someone with inside access to Heritage Umbra's planning sessions. Someone who wanted to ensure that if the operation failed, Preston would take the fall. The revelation landed heavily in the room. Not just a conspiracy but a counter-conspiracy. Layers within layers, wheels turning within wheels. So what happens now? Marlon asked. Now, McKenna said, we follow the evidence wherever it leads. Preston has offered names in exchange for leniency. Those names will lead to others. The network will unravel. But even as she spoke with confidence, a question hung unspoken in the air. How far up did the conspiracy reach? How deeply had Heritage Umbra's ideology penetrated institutions of power and authority? The answer would prove more disturbing than any of them anticipated. If you think this story is just about one flight or one company, you're missing the bigger picture. This is about systems of power and who gets to control them. Subscribe now because what comes next will change how you see everything. The moment the hooded passenger lunged into the aisle, clutching his duffel bag, The carefully maintained order of Flight 728 shattered. "There's a device, front lavatory, help." His voice carried the perfect pitch of terror, not too theatrical, not too controlled. Just the right tremor to convey authentic fear. Celeste moved with practiced efficiency, years of emergency training overriding her personal alarm. "Everyone remain seated," she commanded, making her way forward. First Officer Chin emerged from the cockpit, securing the flight deck door behind her, standard protocol during security incidents. The forward lavatory door stood slightly ajar. Celeste approached cautiously, Chin close behind. Inside, affixed to the mirror with what appeared to be industrial-grade tape, was a small black device. A digital display blinked red numbers: 2247, 2246, 2245. "Captain," Chin called through the secure interphone. "We have confirmation of a device. Timer active." In the cockpit, Captain Kelly's military training took over. He immediately alerted air traffic control, declaring an emergency and requesting priority clearance to the nearest suitable airport, St. Louis Lambert, approximately 22 minutes from their current position. Throughout the cabin, reactions varied wildly. Some passengers sat frozen, unable to process the sudden shift from routine flight to potential disaster. Others began to pray, hands clasped, eyes closed against reality. A few reached for phones, desperate to contact loved ones despite regulations. In row 14, Preston's composure cracked. The carefully constructed facade of entitled passenger gave way to something more primal, the panic of a man whose plan had veered dramatically off course. "This isn't right," he muttered, more to himself than to Marlon. "This isn't the sequence." Marlon caught the words, filing them away as further confirmation of his suspicions. "Sequence?" he repeated. Interesting choice of words for someone who's supposedly as surprised as the rest of us. Preston's eyes darted around the cabin, taking inventory of exits, of witnesses, of variables beyond his control. When Captain Kelly's voice came over the intercom announcing the emergency diversion, Preston's right hand began to tremble, a subtle tell that Marlon noted with interest. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We are diverting to St. Louis Lambert International Airport due to a security concern. Please follow all crew instructions precisely. We expect to be on the ground in approximately 22 minutes. The measured calm of Kelly's voice did little to quell the rising tide of fear. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments, standard procedure during emergency descents. The cabin filled with the sound of plastic hitting plastic and the hiss of oxygen flowing through tubes. In the confusion, Preston seized the opportunity. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing a cell phone he'd kept hidden despite regulations. With practiced movements, he disabled airplane mode and opened an encrypted messaging application. "That's a federal violation," Marlon observed, watching as Preston's fingers flew across the screen. "So report me," Preston snapped, continuing to type. The username displayed at the top of the application caught Marlon's attention: Umbra Prime. The message Preston composed was brief but revealing: "Operation compromised. Device discovered early. LSU girl live streaming. Abort all secondary protocols. Initiate containment procedures." Before he could send it, Terrence Washington appeared beside their row. "Sir, all electronic devices must be powered down immediately," the air marshal said, authority radiating from every syllable. Preston hesitated, thumb hovering over the send button. Washington's hand moved subtly toward his hip, where his weapon was concealed beneath his jacket. "Now, sir." With visible reluctance, Preston complied, but not before pressing send. The message disappeared into the digital ether, its recipients unknown, its consequences yet to unfold. As the plane began its emergency descent, the cabin atmosphere thickened with tension. Celeste and her fellow flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking seatbelts, providing reassurance where possible, maintaining the illusion of control amid chaos. In row 17, the hooded passenger sat unnaturally still, head bowed as if in prayer. But Marlon, watching through gaps between seats, noticed something odd. The man's hands weren't clasped in supplication but busy with something in his lap. Something small and electronic. Have you ever noticed how in moments of crisis, certain details suddenly become crystal clear? How your senses heighten, allowing you to perceive things you might otherwise miss. That's what Marlon experienced now, his mind cataloging anomalies, inconsistencies, patterns that didn't align with the official narrative unfolding around him. The plane banked sharply, beginning its final approach to Lambert International. Through the windows, passengers could see emergency vehicles assembling on the tarmac. Fire trucks, ambulances, police cruisers with lights flashing. The reality of their situation hit home. This wasn't a drill or a false alarm. This was a genuine threat response. When we land, Preston said suddenly, leaning close to Marlon, you should know that I have connections in St. Louis law enforcement. This won't end well for you if you continue with these accusations. Is that a threat? Marlon asked, voice steady despite the aircraft's turbulent descent. A reality check, Preston replied. Heritage Umbra has chapters in 38 states. Members include judges, police chiefs, corporate executives. We look out for each other. The implication was clear. The network Preston represented wasn't just a fringe group of racists. It was an organized system with tentacles reaching into positions of power and authority across the country. If you're just now realizing how deep institutional racism can run, how it can hide behind badges and titles and corporate logos, hit that subscribe button. This story is about to show you exactly how these systems operate. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical groan. Captain Kelly's voice came over the intercom one final time. Brace for landing. Head down, stay down. Passengers assumed the position, foreheads pressed against the seats in front of them, arms crossed over knees. The plane touched down hard, reverse thrusters roaring as Kelly executed an emergency stop. The force threw everyone forward against their seatbelts, then back against their seats. The moment the aircraft came to a complete stop, emergency slides deployed from exit doors. Flight attendants began evacuation procedures, their voices carrying the practiced calm of those trained for disaster. Leave everything. Move quickly. Jump and slide. In the controlled chaos that followed, Marlon made a critical decision. As passengers rushed toward exits, he reached under Preston's seat and grabbed the man's leather folio, the one containing the Tampa County Deputy Reserve badge. Preston, already halfway to the exit, didn't notice the theft until it was too late. Hey, he shouted, turning back. That's my property. But the flow of evacuating passengers pushed him forward, out onto the emergency slide. Marlon tucked the folio into his jacket and followed the evacuation route, sliding down onto the tarmac where emergency personnel directed passengers to gathering points away from the aircraft. On the ground, federal agents moved with practiced efficiency, separating passengers for questioning. Bomb squad technicians approached the plane in heavy protective gear, prepared to neutralize the device in the lavatory. Leah, somehow still live-streaming despite the evacuation, captured the scene for her now millions of viewers. We're on the ground in St. Louis, she narrated breathlessly. They're treating this as a real bomb threat. Everyone's being questioned. Wait, something's happening with the guy from row 14. Her camera panned to show Preston engaged in heated conversation with an FBI agent. He gestured repeatedly toward Marlon, who stood calmly nearby, the stolen folio concealed inside his jacket. Sir, I need to see some identification, a female agent said, approaching Marlon. Of course, he replied, producing his driver's license and Pangraph credentials. I'm Marlon Tate, CEO of Pangraph Technologies. And I believe I have information relevant to your investigation. The agent, her badge identified her as Special Agent Priya McKenna, raised an eyebrow. What kind of information? Evidence that this incident may be connected to a pattern of corporate sabotage and organized harassment, Marlon replied. And possibly. He lowered his voice, a false flag operation. McKenna's expression remained neutral, but her posture shifted slightly, the subtle tell of someone whose interest has been piqued. Come with me, Mr. Tate. As they walked toward a mobile command center set up near the terminal, Marlon glanced back at Preston, who was watching them with undisguised fury. The man who had refused to sit beside him, who had whispered that men like you should know their place, was now realizing that the power dynamic had shifted dramatically. Inside the command center, McKenna offered Marlon a seat at a small table. Start from the beginning, she said. And don't leave anything out. Marlon placed Preston's folio on the table. This belongs to a man named Preston Lloyd. Inside you'll find a Tampa County Deputy Reserve badge that Captain Kelly already noted is expired. Lloyd is also the treasurer of a political action committee called Heritage Umbra, which I believe has been orchestrating attacks against minority-owned businesses, including mine. As Marlon detailed the connections between Preston, Heritage Umbra, and the Tampa County contract sabotage, McKenna's radio crackled with an update from the bomb squad. Command, this is explosive ordnance disposal. Device appears to be non-functional. Repeat, non-functional. Professional construction but no actual explosive material. This is a sophisticated fake. The revelation changed everything. Not a terrorist attack but a hoax. Not a random act of violence, but a calculated performance designed to achieve specific objectives. A fake, McKenna mused. Which raises the question, what was the real purpose of today's events? Before Marlon could respond, a commotion erupted outside the command center. Preston Lloyd, now in handcuffs, was being escorted toward a waiting FBI vehicle. His face contorted with rage as he caught sight of Marlon through the window. "You have no idea what you've done," he shouted. "This goes higher than you can imagine. They'll never let you testify." The outburst, witnessed by dozens of passengers and captured on multiple phones, was the final nail in Preston's coffin. Any pretense of innocence or coincidence had been abandoned, replaced by the naked fury of a man who recognized that his carefully constructed operation had collapsed around him. If you've made it this far into the story, you're about to discover just how high this conspiracy reaches. Comment, follow the money, if you're ready to see where the trail leads. As Preston was driven away, Leah approached the command center, phone in hand. "Excuse me," she said to the agent guarding the door. "I think Agent McKenna needs to see this." The agent hesitated, then allowed her inside. Leah held out her phone, showing a notification. "Someone slipped a memory card into my seat back pocket during the flight," she explained. "I just checked its contents." McKenna took the phone, examining the video files displayed on screen. Night vision footage showed Preston in what appeared to be a garage, assembling the mock device while discussing disrupting corporate parasites and keeping America pure. More damning still were conversations with unseen collaborators about the broader strategy, using security scares to discredit minority business leaders and justify increased surveillance of their companies. "This is significant," McKenna said, understating the obvious. "Where did you say you found this memory card?" "In my seat back pocket," Leah repeated. "I didn't notice it until after we landed. I think someone must have slipped it there during the flight." McKenna's gaze sharpened. "Someone like the passenger from row 17? The one who first alerted the cabin to the device?" Leah's eyes widened with realization. "Yes. He passed by my row several times. He stumbled once near my seat. I didn't think anything of it at the time." The pieces were aligning into a new pattern, one that suggested the hooded passenger wasn't just a random traveler who discovered a bomb. He was a deliberate actor in this drama, playing a role distinct from Preston's operation. "We need to find him," McKenna said, reaching for her radio. "All units, be advised. We have a person of interest, male, approximately 30 years old, last seen wearing a navy hoodie and baseball cap. Subject was seated in 17F and was first to report the device. Approach with caution." But the response came back almost immediately. The hooded passenger was nowhere to be found. In the chaos of evacuation and questioning, he had somehow slipped away, leaving behind only questions about his role in the day's events. Meanwhile, bomb squad technicians had completed their analysis of the device. Their report painted a picture of sophisticated deception. A timer connected to nothing, LED lights designed to suggest active electronics, and a small capsule containing chemicals that, when heated, would produce an odor similar to burning circuitry, enough to convince even experienced personnel of a genuine threat, at least initially. "This wasn't built by an amateur," the lead technician explained to McKenna. "Whoever designed this wanted it to pass preliminary inspection. They just didn't want it to actually explode." The distinction was crucial. A real bomb would have indicated genuine terrorist intent. A fake bomb constructed with this level of detail suggested something more calculated. A psychological operation designed to create fear and disruption without crossing the line into mass casualty terrorism. As evening fell over St. Louis, the various threads of investigation began to converge. The FBI's cyber division had traced the encrypted communications from Preston's phone, identifying several Heritage Umbra associates in positions of authority across multiple states. The Financial Crimes Unit had mapped a network of shell companies used to funnel donations into the PAC's accounts. And forensic analysis of the fake bomb had yielded DNA evidence linking it to the garage shown in the memory card footage. But perhaps the most significant discovery came from the flight manifest. An unassigned seat in first class, 3A, purchased by a shell corporation linked to the same network that funded Heritage Umbra. A seat that had remained conspicuously empty throughout the flight. "Their operative never boarded," McKenna explained to Marlon during a follow-up interview. According to Preston's testimony, someone was supposed to be in that seat, the person who would discover the device during final approach, becoming a hero while simultaneously advancing Heritage Umbra's narrative about security threats. "But they aborted," Marlon concluded. "Why?" "Preston believes it was because of the live stream," McKenna said. Once Leah started broadcasting, the operation became too visible, too traceable. Their first-class operative received instructions to stand down, which left Preston exposed, Marlon noted. No wonder he panicked. Exactly. The plan shifted to immediate disruption. Force an emergency landing before you could piece together too much about Heritage Umbra's involvement. But they didn't count on the hooded passenger, Marlon said. Or the memory card. McKenna nodded. Someone wanted this operation to fail spectacularly. Someone with inside knowledge of Heritage Umbra's plans, who deliberately exposed them at the moment of maximum vulnerability. The question hung between them, unspoken but pressing. Who was the hooded passenger and what were his true objectives? The answer would prove more complex, and more disturbing, than either of them anticipated. If you think this story is just about one flight or one company, you're missing the bigger picture. This is about systems of power and who gets to control them. Subscribe now because what comes next will change how you see everything. The tarmac at St. Louis Lambert International Airport transformed into a scene from a high-stakes thriller. Emergency vehicles formed a perimeter around Flight 728, their lights painting the concrete in alternating red and blue. Passengers huddled in designated safety zones, some wrapped in silver thermal blankets despite the summer heat, a precaution against shock rather than cold. FBI agents moved with practiced efficiency, separating witnesses into groups for preliminary questioning. Bomb squad technicians emerged from the aircraft, removing their helmets as they approached the mobile command center. Their body language told the story before their words could. Relaxed shoulders, casual strides. Whatever they'd found inside wasn't an immediate threat. Non-functional device, the lead technician reported to Agent McKenna. Professional construction but deliberately inert. Timer connected to nothing. LED display for show. Small chemical packet designed to release burning electronic smell when heated. A performance piece, McKenna concluded. Exactly, the technician agreed. Meant to look and smell convincing enough to trigger emergency protocols, but never intended to detonate. This confirmation transformed the investigation's trajectory. Not terrorism but theater. Not destruction but disruption. The question shifted from who wanted to down a plane to who benefits from this particular form of chaos? Inside the terminal's secure conference room, Preston Lloyd sat handcuffed to a table, his attorney frantically whispering legal advice that Preston had already decided to ignore. Self-preservation had overtaken loyalty to the cause. I want immunity, he repeated to McKenna. Full immunity in exchange for everything I know about Heritage Umbra's operations, funding sources, and leadership structure. McKenna maintained a neutral expression, but her mind calculated the value of his offer. Preston was mid-level at best, a treasurer not an architect. Yet he clearly had access to information that could unravel larger networks. That's not my decision to make, she replied. But cooperation will certainly be noted in my report to the U.S. Attorney. It was enough of an opening for Preston to begin talking. The story he told painted a disturbing picture of organized economic warfare against minority-owned businesses in strategic sectors. Heritage Umbra isn't just about racial preferences, he explained. It's about control of critical infrastructure, data systems, security protocols, transportation networks. The people behind it believe these functions should remain in traditional hands. Traditional meaning white, McKenna said flatly. Preston didn't bother denying it. The strategy has 3 tiers. First, legal pressure, using PAC money to support candidates who will implement favorable procurement policies. Second, information warfare, leaking doctored documents, planting rumors, creating just enough doubt to sway contract decisions. Third, direct action, when targets prove resistant to the first 2 approaches. Like fake bombs on planes, McKenna noted. Exactly, Preston confirmed. Today's operation was designed to disrupt Tate's Seattle presentation while simultaneously advancing a narrative about security risks posed by diversity initiatives in critical industries. And the first-class operative who never boarded? What was their role supposed to be? Preston's expression soured. They were supposed to discover the device during final approach, alert the crew, become the hero. The story would write itself. While corporate elites like Tate remained oblivious to security threats, traditional patriots were protecting American skies. But something went wrong, McKenna prompted. The live stream, Preston said bitterly. Once the LSU girl started broadcasting, everything changed. Too many witnesses, too much visibility. Our first-class operative received abort codes and never boarded. Leaving you exposed, McKenna concluded. Yes, Preston admitted. That's when we shifted to Plan B, immediate disruption. Force an emergency landing before Tate could piece together too much about our involvement. But you didn't count on the hooded passenger, McKenna said. Or the memory card. For the first time, genuine confusion crossed Preston's face. That's what I've been trying to tell you. The guy from row 17 wasn't ours. Our operative was supposed to be in first class, seat 3A. He never boarded. Then who raised the alarm about the device? Preston shook his head. I don't know. When I saw someone rushing toward the lavatory, I assumed it was a random passenger who had somehow discovered the device early. It wasn't until we were on the ground that I realized something was wrong. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already Byzantine plot. If the hooded passenger wasn't Preston's accomplice, who was he? And how did he know about the device? If you're starting to see that this goes beyond one racist passenger or one fake bomb, you're paying attention. Like this video if you want to understand how deep these networks really go. While Preston's interrogation continued, forensic teams processed the evidence from the memory card Leah had discovered in her seat back pocket. The night vision footage provided damning documentation of Heritage Umbra's planning sessions. Preston assembling the mock device while discussing strategy with unseen collaborators. We've identified 3 additional voices on the audio, a forensic analyst reported to McKenna. Voice recognition software matched one to Gregory Harmon, chief of police in Sarasota County, Florida. Another to William Vaughn, senior procurement officer for the Department of Defense. The third remains unidentified, but analysis suggests military or intelligence background based on terminology and speech patterns. The implications were staggering. Not fringe extremists but public officials. Not isolated actors but a coordinated network with access to sensitive government functions. Across the terminal, Marlin reviewed the findings with growing concern. The conspiracy targeting Pangraph wasn't just about racial animus, it was about maintaining control of systems his company threatened to disrupt. Pangraph's logistics algorithms could revolutionize emergency response, supply chain management, and resource allocation. They could also make certain traditional power brokers obsolete. Mr. Tate? Leah approached hesitantly. I wanted to thank you for standing your ground today. What happened on that plane, it needed to be exposed. Marlin smiled slightly. I should be thanking you. Without your live stream, much of this might have remained hidden. I'm still trying to process it all, Leah admitted. The planning, the coordination, it's like something from a movie except it's real. That's how systemic discrimination works, Marlin explained. It's not always loud confrontations or obvious barriers. Sometimes it's quiet conversations in boardrooms. Subtle pressure on procurement officers. Whisper campaigns about reliability and cultural fit. And bombs on planes, Leah added grimly. When the subtle approaches fail, Marlin agreed. Their conversation was interrupted by Captain Kelly, who approached with First Officer Chin. Both still wore their Northwest Dominion uniforms, though the crisp professionalism of their appearance had weathered the day's events. Mr. Tate, Kelly extended his hand. I wanted to apologize for what you experienced on our aircraft today. You have nothing to apologize for, Captain, Marlin replied, shaking his hand. You and your crew handled an impossible situation with remarkable composure. Still, Kelly insisted, as representatives of Northwest Dominion, we're deeply troubled by what occurred. I've already spoken with our CEO, who asked me to convey that the airline will be conducting a thorough review of how Lloyd was able to leverage his expired credentials to access passenger information. I appreciate that, Marlin said. But I suspect you'll find this goes beyond one airline or one security breach. That's what concerns me, Chin interjected. If Heritage Umbra has the reach Preston claims, how many other systems have they compromised? How many other operations are in progress right now? The question hung in the air, unanswerable yet pressing. The investigation had uncovered one plot, but logic suggested it wasn't isolated. Heritage Umbra's strategy targeted multiple sectors, multiple companies, multiple leaders who didn't fit their definition of traditional. Have you ever realized that what you thought was an isolated incident was actually part of a pattern? That's what these investigators were discovering. Comment, connect the dots, if you're seeing the bigger picture emerge. As evening deepened into night, the investigation expanded beyond the immediate events of Flight 728. FBI field offices across the country began compiling reports of similar incidents, minority business leaders experiencing random security delays, unexplained contract losses, anonymous tips to regulatory agencies that triggered costly investigations only to be proven baseless months later. It's the same playbook, McKenna explained during a briefing with her superiors. Different targets, different tactics, but the same underlying strategy: economic containment of minority-owned businesses in strategic sectors. And the hooded passenger? The assistant director asked. Any progress identifying him? Security cameras tracked him exiting the terminal, McKenna reported. He got into a rental car, Chevrolet Malibu, plates stolen from a vehicle in long-term parking. We lost him on I-70 heading east. Professional, the AD noted. Extremely, McKenna agreed. Which raises questions about who he's working for. This doesn't feel like a concerned citizen or a whistleblower. This feels like counterintelligence. The theory gained traction as digital forensics completed their analysis of the memory card. The metadata revealed sophisticated encryption that had been deliberately left accessible, a calling card of sorts, suggesting the creator wanted investigators to know this wasn't amateur work. Whoever recorded Preston in that garage wanted us to find it, the lead analyst explained. They wanted this operation exposed in a specific way at a specific time. The question is why, McKenna mused. What's the objective? The answer began to emerge as financial crimes investigators traced the network of shell companies funding Heritage Umbra. Behind the complex web of LLCs and offshore accounts, they discovered a pattern. Many of the same entities had recently placed significant investments in companies competing directly with those targeted by Heritage Umbra's campaigns. It's not just racism, the financial analyst concluded. It's market manipulation. They undermine minority-owned businesses, then profit when contracts go to their preferred alternatives. Which explains why they targeted Pangraph so aggressively, McKenna realized. Tate's company is poised to revolutionize government logistics systems. Contracts worth billions. Exactly, the analyst confirmed. And guess who's on the board of their main competitor? William Vaughn, the same DoD procurement officer whose voice we identified on the memory card. The conspiracy was expanding beyond hate into something equally insidious. Greed disguised as ideology, profit masquerading as principle. By midnight, Preston Lloyd had provided enough information to justify search warrants for Heritage Umbra's offices in Tampa, Atlanta, and Washington, D.C. FBI teams moved simultaneously, seizing documents, computers, and financial records that would further illuminate the organization's reach and resources. What they discovered exceeded even their most pessimistic expectations. Detailed dossiers on dozens of minority business leaders, surveillance reports, strategic plans for containment operations, targeting specific companies, and most disturbing of all, a list of sympathetic officials in regulatory agencies, law enforcement and military procurement. This isn't a fringe group, McKenna reported to Marlon during their final debriefing. This is an organized attempt to maintain control of critical infrastructure by preventing diversity in ownership and leadership. I've been feeling their pressure for years, Marlon acknowledged. But I never imagined the coordination behind it. Few people do, McKenna said. That's what makes it effective. Each incident seems isolated, coincidental. It's only when you step back and examine the pattern that the design becomes visible. As dawn broke over St. Louis, passengers from Flight 728 began departing on rescheduled flights. The immediate crisis had passed, but its implications continued to unfold. News networks ran continuous coverage of the Northwest Dominion incident, with Leah's livestream footage playing on repeat. Social media exploded with hashtags. Hashtag Flight 728, hashtag Heritage Umbra, hashtag Economic Justice. Preston Lloyd, now in federal custody, awaited transfer to Washington, D.C., where a grand jury would hear evidence against him and his co-conspirators. His attorney had negotiated a cooperation agreement that might reduce his sentence but couldn't eliminate it entirely. The charges were too serious, the evidence too damning. For Marlon, the ordeal had transformed from personal harassment to something approaching vindication. The systems that had worked against Pangraph for years were finally being exposed, their mechanisms laid bare for public examination. What will you do now? McKenna asked as they prepared to part ways. Continue the work, Marlon replied simply. Pangraph's algorithms can make emergency response more efficient, supply chains more resilient, resource allocation more equitable. That's why they feared us enough to plant a fake bomb. That's why we can't stop. McKenna nodded in understanding. We'll need your continued cooperation as the investigation proceeds. There will be depositions, possibly testimony if cases go to trial. Whatever it takes, Marlon assured her. This isn't just about Pangraph anymore. This is about ensuring that systems meant to serve everyone actually do. As they shook hands, McKenna's phone buzzed with a new alert. She checked the screen, her expression shifting subtly. Something wrong? Marlon asked. Maybe not wrong, McKenna replied carefully. But definitely interesting. The rental car used by our hooded passenger was just found abandoned at a bus station in Indianapolis. Inside was a laptop containing files on Heritage Umbra's operations, files that appear to have been compiled over months of surveillance. By whom? Marlon asked. That's the interesting part, McKenna said. The laptop's user profile was registered to a former intelligence officer who now works for the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. Someone who's been building a RICO case against Heritage Umbra for over a year. The revelation suggested a new dimension to the day's events. Not just a conspiracy exposed, but a counter-operation executed with precision. The hooded passenger hadn't stumbled upon Preston's plot. He had been monitoring it, waiting for the perfect moment to trigger its collapse. So the government was watching them all along, Marlon mused. Elements within the government, McKenna corrected. Which raises its own questions about who knew what and when. The distinction was crucial. Not a monolithic response but competing factions within systems of power, some working to maintain traditional hierarchies, others fighting to transform them. If you've ever wondered whether your government is working for or against justice, the answer is yes. Like this video if you want to understand the complex reality behind simplistic narratives. As Marlon finally boarded his rescheduled flight to Seattle, he carried with him not just his original presentation materials but a new understanding of the forces aligned against companies like his. The path forward would not be easier. If anything, Heritage Umbra's exposed members would be replaced by more careful, more subtle operators. But at least now the pattern was visible. The system was named. And in that naming lay the first step toward transformation. 3 days after the emergency landing in St. Louis, Marlon stood before a packed auditorium in Seattle. The audience for Pangraph's presentation had tripled in size, tech executives and government officials drawn not just by the company's innovative algorithms but by the dramatic events that had preceded their unveiling. Before I discuss our emergency response logistics system, Marlon began, I want to acknowledge what many of you have seen in the news. Yes, I was on Flight 728. Yes, the incident was connected to efforts to prevent this very presentation. And yes, those efforts were part of a larger pattern targeting minority-owned businesses in strategic sectors. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Most had expected a brief acknowledgement before pivoting to technical specifications. Instead, Marlon was directly addressing the elephant in the room. What happened on that flight wasn't about one passenger's prejudice, he continued. It was about systems of power responding to perceived threats. Pangraph's algorithms don't just optimize logistics, they democratize them. They remove gatekeepers. They make certain traditional power brokers obsolete. On screens behind him, data visualizations illustrated his point. Current emergency response systems versus Pangraph's approach. The contrast was stark, hierarchical versus distributed, rigid versus adaptive, exclusive versus inclusive. This is why organizations like Heritage Umbra target companies like mine, Marlon explained. Not just because of who owns them but because of how they function. Distributed systems threaten centralized control. Adaptive networks undermine rigid hierarchies. Inclusion challenges exclusivity. The presentation shifted from technical demonstration to something more profound. An analysis of how innovation intersects with power, how algorithms embody values, how technology can either reinforce or transform existing social structures. Meanwhile, across the country, the investigation into Heritage Umbra continued expanding. FBI teams executed additional search warrants, financial crimes units traced complex money flows, and cybersecurity experts mapped digital communications networks connecting conspirators. We've identified 47 individuals in positions of authority directly linked to Heritage Umbra operations, Agent McKenna reported during a secure briefing at FBI headquarters. 17 in law enforcement, 12 in military procurement, 9 in regulatory agencies, 5 in federal contracting, 4 in transportation security. Jesus, the assistant director muttered. This isn't infiltration. This is infrastructure. Exactly, McKenna agreed. They've built a parallel system within existing institutions, a network that can identify threats to traditional power structures and mobilize resources to neutralize them. And the hooded passenger? Any progress identifying him? McKenna hesitated. That's where things get complicated. The laptop found in the abandoned rental car belonged to Marcus Daniels, former military intelligence, currently assigned to a joint task force between the Civil Rights Division and the National Security Agency. So he was running a counter-operation, the AD concluded. It appears so, McKenna confirmed. But here's the problem. Daniels denies being on Flight 728. Says he was in Washington, D.C. the entire day, which security footage from the Justice Department confirms. His laptop was stolen from his apartment 2 weeks ago, a theft he reported but which wasn't prioritized by local police. So someone used his identity as cover, the AD reasoned. The question is who? The answer remained elusive, but patterns were emerging. The memory card's encryption matched protocols used by a specialized unit within the NSA tasked with monitoring domestic extremism. The timing of the hooded passenger's intervention aligned perfectly with Heritage Umbra's most vulnerable moment. The precision of the evidence placement suggested intimate knowledge of FBI investigative procedures. Whoever exposed Preston's operation knew exactly what they were doing, McKenna concluded. This wasn't opportunistic. This was calculated. The theory gained further support when digital forensics completed their analysis of Preston's encrypted communications. The username, Umbra Prime, connected to multiple accounts across various platforms, all using sophisticated anonymization techniques, except for one critical lapse 3 months earlier. For approximately 7 minutes, a login occurred from an unmasked IP address traced to a defense contractor specializing in surveillance systems. Either an amateur mistake by professional conspirators, the lead analyst suggested, or a deliberate breadcrumb left for us to find. The latter seemed increasingly likely as more evidence emerged. The memory card contained not just the garage footage but encrypted folders that unlocked sequentially as the investigation progressed, almost as if designed to guide investigators along a specific path of discovery. It's like someone mapped out exactly how they wanted this conspiracy exposed, McKenna observed. Step by step, revelation by revelation. But to what end? The question lingered as the investigation expanded beyond Heritage Umbra to the systems that had enabled its operation. How had Preston accessed Northwest Dominion's passenger manifests? Who had approved William Vaughn's position on the board of Pangraph as competitor while he maintained procurement authority at the Department of Defense? Why had Marcus Daniels' laptop theft received such low priority despite his sensitive position? The answers pointed toward a disturbing conclusion. Heritage Umbra wasn't an aberration within American institutions but an expression of tendencies already present within them. Not a corruption of systems but a manifestation of their underlying design. If you've ever suspected that what we call isolated incidents of discrimination might actually be features rather than bugs in our systems, you're starting to see what investigators discovered. Comment, systemic, if you recognize this pattern in your own experiences. Back in Seattle, Marlin concluded his presentation to thunderous applause. Pangraph's emergency response system had impressed even the most skeptical observers, its potential to save lives and resources undeniable. Government representatives approached with contract offers, tech executives proposed partnerships, investors pledged capital for expansion. But amid the professional triumph, Marlin remained troubled by unanswered questions. Who was the hooded passenger? Why had they chosen that specific moment to expose Preston's operation? And perhaps most importantly, who had orchestrated the counter-operation that had unfolded with such precision? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Roof? 10 minutes. Come alone. Instinct told him to ignore it, to report it to security. But curiosity, the same drive that had built Pangraph from dorm room concept to industry disruptor, pushed him toward the elevator and up to the convention center's roof garden. There, leaning against the railing with Seattle's skyline spread before him, stood a man Marlin had never expected to see again, the hooded passenger from row 17. Mr. Tate, the man said without turning. Thank you for coming. Who are you? Marlin asked, maintaining distance. A concerned party, the man replied, finally facing him. Without the hood and cap, he appeared older, more weathered, eyes that had seen too much, shoulders bearing invisible weight. Someone who recognized that Heritage Umbra needed to be exposed in a very specific way. Why? Because traditional investigations would have identified a few bad actors while leaving the underlying systems intact, the man explained. We needed public exposure. Live-streamed evidence. Undeniable connections between ideology and action. Marlin pressed. The man smiled slightly. Let's just say there are factions within government that recognize the threat organizations like Heritage Umbra pose to democratic institutions. Factions that have been building cases, gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment to act. And I was what, bait? Marlin asked, an edge entering his voice. No, the man said firmly. You were the catalyst, the variable they didn't account for. A black CEO who refused to move from his assigned seat, who recognized the patterns others missed, who had the courage to confront systems designed to exclude him. The explanation was flattering but incomplete. It didn't address how this counter-operation had anticipated Preston's actions with such precision, how the memory card had been prepared before the flight even departed, how the hooded passenger had known exactly when to discover the device. You were monitoring them, Marlin realized. You knew about the operation before it happened. Heritage Umbra has been under surveillance for 14 months, the man confirmed. We knew they were escalating from information warfare to direct action. We just didn't know when or where until Preston requested seat 14A on your flight. So you let it happen, Marlin said, the implication sinking in. You let them plant a device on a commercial aircraft. You used those passengers as pawns. The device was never a threat, the man countered. We confirmed it was non-functional before takeoff. The risk was calculated and minimal compared to the threat Heritage Umbra poses if allowed to continue operating unchecked. The justification was cold comfort. Lives had been disrupted, fear instilled, trust violated, all in service of exposing a conspiracy that could perhaps have been addressed through other means. Who are you really? Marlin asked again. The man reached into his jacket, producing not identification but a thumb drive. Someone who believes Pangraph's algorithms could help identify similar networks before they reach Heritage Umbra's level of infiltration. Someone who thinks your distributed approach to emergency response could be applied to threat assessment and containment. He offered the drive to Marlin. Everything we have on their operations, their methods, their digital signatures. Patterns your systems might recognize in other contexts, other regions. Marlin hesitated, the offer simultaneously appealing and troubling. And in exchange? Nothing immediate, the man said. But someday we may ask for your assistance in identifying emerging threats to democratic systems. Threats that traditional security approaches might miss but that your algorithms might detect. The proposal hung between them, not quite a government contract, not quite a private partnership, but something in the liminal space between. A recognition that the challenges facing democratic institutions required new approaches, new collaborations, new ways of conceptualizing security itself. I'll consider it, Marlin said finally, accepting the drive. That's all we ask, the man replied. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Mr. Tate. The first-class seat that remained empty? The operative who never boarded? We're still looking for them. Preston wasn't the top of this pyramid. The warning was clear. Heritage Umbra had been exposed but not eliminated. The network had been damaged but not destroyed. The work of transformation had begun but was far from complete. If you think this story has reached its conclusion, you're missing the bigger picture. This is just the beginning of a much longer struggle. Subscribe now because what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about power in America. 2 weeks after the Seattle presentation, Marlin stood before a different audience. Cameras, microphones, and reporters gathered in Pangraph's Chicago headquarters. The press conference had been announced only hours earlier, yet the room was packed, a testament to the public's continued fascination with Flight 728 and its aftermath. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Marlin began. Today, I want to address not just what happened on that flight, but what it reveals about the systems we all navigate daily. Behind him, screens displayed data visualizations, not Pangraph's algorithms this time, but maps of Heritage Umbra's network, connections between seemingly disparate incidents, patterns of economic exclusion across multiple industries. What occurred on Flight 728 wasn't an isolated incident of prejudice, Marlin continued. It was one expression of a coordinated effort to maintain traditional power structures by preventing companies like mine from accessing critical markets and infrastructure. He detailed the connections between Heritage Umbra and contract losses Pangraph had experienced, the strategic targeting of minority-owned businesses in key sectors, the infiltration of regulatory agencies and procurement offices by individuals committed to maintaining what Preston had called traditional control. But this isn't just about Pangraph, Marlin emphasized. This is about systems designed to appear neutral while producing consistently biased outcomes. This is about networks of influence that operate in boardrooms and government offices, invisible to most citizens yet profoundly shaping their lives. The presentation shifted from specific incidents to broader patterns, statistical evidence of disparities in government contracting, venture capital distribution, regulatory enforcement. Data that transformed anecdotal experiences into documented realities. I'm sharing this today because visibility matters, Marlin explained. Systems of exclusion thrive in darkness. They depend on each incident appearing isolated, coincidental, disconnected from larger patterns. As he spoke, news alerts buzzed on reporters' phones. The Department of Justice had just announced indictments against 23 individuals connected to Heritage Umbra, including high-ranking officials in multiple agencies. The charges ranged from conspiracy and wire fraud to civil rights violations and abuse of office. I've been asked repeatedly what Pangraph will do in response to these revelations, Marlin continued. Today I'm announcing 3 initiatives. He outlined the first, a partnership with the Civil Rights Division to develop algorithms capable of identifying patterns of discriminatory procurement practices across federal agencies. By analyzing contract awards, bid rejections, and procurement officer histories, we can detect statistical anomalies that may indicate systemic bias, making visible what has long remained hidden. The second initiative focused on corporate accountability. Pangraph would release an annual equity and enterprise report, documenting disparities in venture capital funding, government contracting, and regulatory treatment across demographic groups. Transparency creates pressure for change, Marlin explained. When patterns become undeniable, systems must either transform or acknowledge their true design. The third announcement proved most surprising. Pangraph was establishing a legal defense fund for whistleblowers who exposed discriminatory practices within institutions of power. The hooded passenger from row 17 remains unidentified, Marlin noted. But whoever they are, they risked everything to expose a conspiracy that threatened democratic principles. Not everyone has the resources or protection to make such choices. This fund will help ensure that those who stand against systemic discrimination don't stand alone. The press conference concluded with questions, some technical, some political, some personal. Through them all, Marlin maintained the same measured tone, the same focus on systems rather than individuals, patterns rather than isolated events. No, I don't believe every white person in authority is part of a conspiracy, he clarified in response to one particularly loaded question. What I believe is that systems designed with certain assumptions tend to reproduce those assumptions unless deliberately transformed. This isn't about individual guilt but collective responsibility. As reporters filed out, Agent McKenna approached from the back of the room. She had been observing without drawing attention, assessing the public narrative Marlin was constructing around events still under active investigation. Impressive presentation, she said when they were alone. Though I notice you didn't mention your rooftop meeting in Seattle. Marlin's expression revealed nothing. I'm not sure what you're referring to. The convention center has security cameras, Mr. Tate, McKenna replied. We know you met with someone matching the description of our hooded passenger. We know he gave you something. What we don't know is what you discussed. For a moment, Marlin considered continued denial. Then, recognizing the futility, he opted for partial truth. He offered perspective on Heritage Umbra's operations. Suggested that similar networks might exist in other regions, other sectors. And the thumb drive? Data supporting those claims, Marlin acknowledged. Nothing that would compromise your investigation. McKenna studied him, weighing his response against her own intelligence. Our analysts believe the hooded passenger may be connected to a specialized unit within the NSA, one tasked with monitoring domestic threats to critical infrastructure. A unit that operates in gray areas of authorization and oversight. If that's true, Marlin replied carefully, it would suggest competing factions within government itself, some working to maintain traditional power structures, others fighting to transform them. Precisely, McKenna confirmed. Which raises the question. Which faction are you aligning yourself with? The question cut to the heart of choices Marlin had been contemplating since Seattle. The thumb drive contained more than Heritage Umbra data. It included access protocols for systems that no private citizen should possess, surveillance capabilities that existed in legal shadows, opportunities that were simultaneously powerful and problematic. I'm aligning with transparency, Marlin said finally. With making visible what has long remained hidden. With creating systems that distribute power rather than concentrate it. Noble goals, McKenna acknowledged. But the methods matter, Mr. Tate. The means shape the ends in ways we don't always anticipate. The warning was delivered without hostility, one professional recognizing the ethical complexities another faced. Not a threat but a caution against paths that might begin in justice but end elsewhere. I appreciate your concern, Marlon said. And I hope Pangraph can continue cooperating with the FBI as this investigation proceeds. Of course, McKenna replied. Just remember that systems of accountability apply to everyone, even those fighting for necessary change. With that, she departed, leaving Marlon to consider the delicate balance between transformation and transgression, between challenging systems and becoming what he opposed. If you've ever found yourself questioning whether you can change a system without being changed by it, you're wrestling with the same questions Marlon faced. Comment: integrity. If you believe how we fight matters as much as what we fight for. That evening, Marlon returned to his Chicago apartment for the first time since before Flight 728. The space felt simultaneously familiar and strange. Unchanged physically yet viewed through eyes that had witnessed the machinery behind systems he'd previously only sensed. On his dining table, he spread the contents of the thumb drive, data on Heritage Umbra's operations, yes, but also tools for monitoring similar networks, for penetrating encrypted communications, for tracking financial flows through shell companies and offshore accounts. Power in digital form. Capabilities that could expose injustice or enable it, depending on the user's intentions and constraints. His phone buzzed with a text from the same unknown number that had summoned him to the Seattle rooftop. Decision time approaching. Systems or symptoms? The cryptic message referenced their conversation. The choice between addressing surface manifestations of discrimination or transforming the underlying structures that produced them. Between treating symptoms or redesigning systems. Marlon didn't respond immediately. Instead, he opened his laptop and began coding, not utilizing the surveillance tools he'd been given but creating something new. An algorithm designed to detect patterns of exclusion across multiple datasets, to identify statistical anomalies in contract awards, to map networks of influence through public records. A system to make other systems visible. A tool for transparency rather than surveillance. A means of accountability that itself remained accountable. Hours passed as he refined the code, tested edge cases, built in ethical constraints. Dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan when he finally sent his response to the unknown number. Both. But on my terms. The reply came almost immediately. Understood. Watch for package tomorrow. The following day, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Pangraph's headquarters. Inside was a single document, an invitation to testify before a classified Senate subcommittee on emerging threats to critical infrastructure. The hearing would focus on non-state actors attempting to maintain control of strategic systems through both legal and extra-legal means. An opportunity to address decision-makers directly. To present evidence of patterns most preferred to ignore. To advocate for transformation of systems designed to exclude. Marlon confirmed his attendance, recognizing both the opportunity and the risk. By entering those chambers, he would be stepping further into realms of power where ethical boundaries blurred, where means and ends entangled in complex ways, where good intentions could pave problematic paths. Yet refusing meant accepting limitations on the change he sought to create. It meant allowing systems designed for exclusion to continue operating unchallenged at the highest levels. The choice was not between perfect options but between imperfect approaches to necessary transformation. Between remaining pure but limited or engaging and risking compromise. Between idealism and impact. As he prepared his testimony, Marlon returned repeatedly to the question Agent McKenna had posed. Which faction was he aligning with? The answer remained elusive, perhaps because the binary framing itself was insufficient. Perhaps the path forward lay not in choosing between existing factions but in creating new configurations of power, distributed rather than concentrated, transparent rather than hidden, accountable rather than autonomous. Perhaps the most radical act was not destroying systems but redesigning them according to different principles, different values, different visions of what society could become. If you believe that transforming systems requires more than exposing their flaws, that it demands creating viable alternatives, then you understand the journey Marlon was beginning. Subscribe now to follow this ongoing story of systems, power, and the courage to imagine different futures. 6 months after Flight 728, Independence Day celebrations illuminated Seattle's Lake Union. Fireworks bloomed against the night sky, their reflections dancing across dark water. On a private barge roped off for VIPs, Marlon stood surrounded by unlikely companions. Captain Kelly, Celeste Ortiz, First Officer Chin, Agent McKenna, and Leah Novak, whose livestream had transformed from college project to professional platform with over 2 million subscribers. Hard to believe it's been half a year, Leah remarked, raising her glass in an informal toast. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. And sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago, Celeste added. Her career had evolved since the incident. Promoted to safety training coordinator, developing new protocols for handling discrimination and security threats simultaneously. For some, it is a lifetime ago, McKenna noted. Preston Lloyd had accepted a plea deal, providing testimony that had led to 27 convictions across multiple jurisdictions. Heritage Umbra's visible structure had been dismantled, its assets frozen, its leaders facing years in federal prison. Yet everyone on the barge understood that surface victories didn't necessarily translate to systemic transformation. New organizations would emerge with different names but similar objectives. New strategies would develop, more subtle, more difficult to detect. The underlying currents that had produced Heritage Umbra remained, flowing through American institutions like invisible rivers. "Your Senate testimony made quite an impact," Captain Kelly said to Marlon. After 30 years with Northwest Dominion, he had recently accepted a position on the Federal Aviation Administration's Security Advisory Board, part of a broader effort to address vulnerabilities in transportation systems. "Some impact," Marlon acknowledged, "though less than I'd hoped." His classified testimony had led to investigations of procurement practices across multiple agencies, revealing statistical patterns of exclusion that could not be explained by merit-based decision-making. Several officials had resigned, others faced ethics reviews. Policy changes had been implemented to increase transparency in contracting. Yet the deeper systems remained largely intact. The networks of influence that operated through country clubs and alumni associations, the unwritten rules that determined who received capital and who was denied it, the subtle signals that communicated who belonged in corridors of power and who remained perpetually other. "Systems don't transform overnight," McKenna reminded him. "Especially ones designed to resist change." "True," Marlon conceded. "But they do transform. The question is whether through crisis or through design." The conversation paused as a particularly spectacular firework exploded overhead, casting the gathering in momentary gold. In that flash of illumination, Marlon noticed a figure on a neighboring boat, a man in a familiar Navy hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, watching their celebration with unusual intensity. The hooded passenger from row 17. Still unidentified despite months of investigation. Still moving through shadows despite international attention on the case. Their eyes met briefly across the water, a moment of mutual recognition, of unspoken understanding. Then the light faded, and the figure melted back into darkness. "Everything all right?" McKenna asked, following Marlon's gaze. "Fine," he replied, deciding against mentioning the sighting. Some connections were better left unacknowledged, some relationships better left undefined. The past 6 months had brought significant changes for Pangraph. The company's emergency response system had been adopted by FEMA and 17 state governments. Its contract analysis algorithm, refined from the code Marlon had written that night in his apartment, was being implemented by the General Services Administration to identify patterns of discriminatory procurement. Success by conventional metrics. Impact by any standard. Yet Marlon remained troubled by questions that extended beyond business objectives or policy outcomes. Questions about power and its distribution, about systems and their design, about transformation and its limits. The thumb drive he'd received in Seattle had contained more than Heritage Umbra data. It had included access keys to surveillance systems that existed in legal gray areas, monitoring capabilities that raised profound questions about privacy and oversight, tools that could expose injustice or enable it depending on the user's intentions. He had not used these more problematic tools. Had not crossed the ethical lines they represented. Yet he had not destroyed them either, recognizing that moments might arise when conventional channels proved insufficient, when systems designed to resist change required unconventional pressure. The tension between means and ends, between purity and efficacy, between idealism and impact remained unresolved. Not a question answered once but a balance maintained daily through countless small choices. If you've ever found yourself weighing what you're willing to do against what needs to be done, you understand the dilemma Marlon faced. Like this video if you believe that how we fight for justice matters as much as the justice we seek. As the fireworks reached their crescendo, Marlon's phone buzzed with a text from the now familiar unknown number. Tampa Federal Building. 3rd floor. Room 317. July 7, 10 a.m. Come alone. No explanation. No context. Just coordinates for a meeting that could represent opportunity or threat, advancement or entrapment, the next chapter in an unfolding story or its abrupt conclusion. Marlon slipped the phone back into his pocket without responding. The choice to attend or ignore would come later. For now, he returned his attention to the celebration, to the companions who had shared a pivotal moment that continued to reverberate through their lives and through systems larger than any individual. To Flight 728, Captain Kelly proposed, raising his glass. And to the truth it exposed. To truth, the others echoed, clinking glasses beneath exploding light. But as they drank to simplified conclusions, Marlin's mind remained fixed on complexities still unfolding. The hooded passenger's reappearance. The mysterious text. The thumb drive's contents. The system still operating in shadows despite Heritage Umbra's exposure. The story wasn't ending. It was evolving, expanding, encompassing new players and new dimensions. What had begun as a seating dispute on a commercial flight had revealed networks of power that extended through institutions, ideologies, and information systems. Networks that wouldn't surrender control without resistance, adaptation, counter-strategy. The final rocket streaked upward, paused at its apex, then exploded into a cascade of gold that fell like slow rain over the water, ephemeral, brilliant, impossible to ignore. And somewhere, on some future flight, in some government office, in some corporate boardroom, the next chapter waited, its opening line already taking shape. If you think this story has reached its conclusion, you're missing the bigger picture. This is just the beginning of a much longer struggle. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell because what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about power in America.